Welcome, everyone, to the Exit Journey podcast, where we talk with CEOs, founders, VCs, and more about the twists and turns of their journey towards a successful exit. I'm Rhonda Geet, host of the podcast and CEO of Straight Talk Marketing. My guest today is Tyler, who is the co-founder and chief revenue officer of Hireframe, a remote staffing company that helps companies get nearshore and offshore talent for mission-critical business roles. Prior to starting Hireframe, Tyler was employee number 4 at TaskUs, where he helped grow the business to 13,000 employees plus across 5 different countries and established partnerships with the fastest growing technology companies. TaskUs went public on the stock exchange in June 2021. Tyler, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. You crushed that intro better than honestly I could have said it myself. So you're hired.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah, you're a great hype person.
I will be your intro person anytime you walk into a room.
Done. Pray I don't win this lottery because you'll get a call.
Awesome. So why don't we jump right in and you tell me a little about you and what you're focused on now.
Yeah, definitely. So thrilled to be on the podcast. Thanks again. And so as you so eloquently put, I have had a long and definitely fruitful journey being an entrepreneur. So I was an employee before at TaskUs, which is a fairly well-known name now, especially in, call it the tech circle. We became kind of the go-to call center service provider for the who's who, I guess, of tech. Now it's incredible to think about. I started working with DoorDash when they were just in a small house in Palo Alto. So definitely early, crazy beginnings. Saw TaskUs through, an incredible, at least exit while I was there to Blackstone Private Equity. And then a couple of years later, as you put, they ended up going public on the stock exchange, which is really cool. And then now I have started this company, Hireframe, which feels, it's funny, thinking back to all the twists and turns, which is very, I feel like appropriate for your podcast. It's funny that we're doing this now where I wonder why it took us so long to land here. It really feels like the perfect fit for myself, my partner, and kind of our strengths. But yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. We are a staffing firm. It's the best way to describe us. We work mostly, should sound familiar, mostly with tech companies, a lot of them venture backed. The key difference with Hireframe than say a lot of people, they might know companies like Upwork, right? Massive marketplace for finding freelancers. Hireframe is more of like a staffing firm approach to that, where we are staffing typically, I would say, higher skilled. We call them mission critical positions. So this is less so like virtual assistants, more so we're hiring staff accountants for these companies as they're growing quickly. And as you can appreciate, hiring has become extremely competitive and extremely expensive in the United States. And tech has I would call it somewhat of a newfound appreciation for profitability. So Hireframe ends up being a really great solution because we are able to give them, the positions they need without having to spend nearly as much. We're able to basically staff those positions at about a third the cost that it would take to hire in, say, San Francisco or Los Angeles or some of these expensive markets. So that's what I'm up to today. But before I started Hireframe, I ran a search fund, which is now becoming a more, I guess, common term that people are getting awareness to. But as my wife will remind me very frequently, she says, nobody knows about search funds but you. Stop, pretending that people do. I think when you and I talked about it, it was the first you had heard of it too. So yeah. I ran a search fund before this, and I will say that experience definitely left an impression, and it really shaped a lot of the way that I am today as an entrepreneur.
Great. And you teed me up perfectly for this question. Can you tell all those out there that might not know what a search fund is?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Sounds like you agree with my wife. Maybe. So a search fund, the term that gets tossed out there is ETA, which stands for entrepreneurship through acquisition. It was new to me. I got introduced to it by my business partner, Harvard Business School, where
I
you
heard of
heard,
them.
it's in New England. They're
They- Okay.
the kids that from there, they're doing okay. Exactly, right. So he had learned about it at HBS, where they actually even teach a course on it. It's quite popular. It's quite popular at other schools like Penn, so Wharton and Stanford. And what ETA is effectively, it's a different way of becoming an entrepreneur than your normal approach, which would be to come up with the next big idea, as in like a startup, or maybe you just start a business, right? You decide to open up your own coffee shop or whatever it might be. For myself, before I heard of ETA or search funds, I too thought that was the only way to start a business, was to literally start a business. ETA is really fantastic, because what you're effectively doing is you're going out and you're acquiring a business. Now the as opposed to starting one. And the traditional approach to doing a search fund is you're looking for a very specific type of business. That is one that is typically it's a small business. So doing call it, I don't know. I've heard of some bigger deals, but let's just call it, for the sake of this conversation, a business that's doing probably less than $15 million in annual revenue, gross revenue. But the key difference is you want a business that's profitable, right? So you're looking for a business. The classic criteria that someone will tell you with a search fund is they're looking for a business that does $1 million in EBITDA, or cash flow, has been profitable consistently for a number of years. So the best business you could find would be one that just every single year, like clockwork, they're doing $1 million cash flow for the last 10 years. And really, what you're offering that business is, typically you're looking for someone who's looking to retire, get out of the business for whatever reason. It can be for, good reasons, like they're trying to just take that next step in life and they want to go hang out on a boat and fish every day. You also might encounter people that have to sell a business because a loved one is sick, or their business partner, might have had some circumstances or whatever it might be. Divorces is another one. But ultimately, what you're offering is you're offering opportunity for that business owner to sell their business. They're going to get hopefully a good, sort of package, right? So some sort of, valuation that allows them to hit their financial goals. And what they're doing is they're handing off that business to someone who will then operate that business. This is where it's different than selling to, say, like a strategic, or a competitor, or that sort of thing. This is someone who will, quote unquote, carry on their legacy. That's what a lot of these sellers look for. But that's ETA, and it's since I started looking at it, which I think was about in 2018 or 2019, I'm trying to remember, it has now, you can see people talking about it on Twitter. There are people that have millions of followers, or whatever they're called, subscribers on YouTube, that all they talk about is these. And the other key component of ETA is, it's called the SBA. I think it's called the 7A loan, SBA 7A loan, which is a federally guaranteed backed loan that you can get from a bank to acquire a business that has positive cash flows. So basically, what the banks look at is that they're saying, this company, like clockwork, they do $1 million cash flow every single year. So we're willing to give you, they'll basically give you an SBA loan up to about $7 million to buy that business. And they're looking at it from their standpoint. They're saying, these guys got to really mess this up for it to go to zero, right? They're banking on you not being a complete idiot, is basically what it is. And that's it. So that's ETA. It's become extremely popular for those reasons.
I think that is a great overview, and you've educated a few more people on what a search
I hope so.
So, speaking of this concept of a search fund,
Yeah.
can you share how that initial attraction to this model got you to starting a business, and how it compares to starting a business from scratch?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I can give you the full rundown of both things. So in terms of when you look at ETA versus starting a business from scratch, what is the attraction? I think it really comes down to three things. The first one is number one by a mile. It's less risky. If I'm just honest with myself, I'm not a daredevil. I hate roller coasters. I'm very afraid of heights. I am the person that, like, when I go to Vegas, I'll go to the blackjack table, I'll win one hand, and then I just back up nervously and I'll like watch my friends gamble, which I know is insane to say because what's the quintessential stereotype of an entrepreneur? We're supposed to be like mavericks. We're out there. We're forging new paths. We're willing to roll the dice every single day. I am sometimes scared of my own shadow. So that is the honest truth, and that's why the search fund really was attractive to me, and I'm sure it's very attractive to others in the same way because you look at it and it's just like if you can be really proficient in your ability to source good deals and then qualify those deals and present a structure to buying that company that really accounts for a lot of your risks, then it's certainly still risky. It's just less risky. When you think about most startups go to zero in a matter of months, right? With a search fund, if you're able to successfully acquire a business, it's far less likely. I don't have the data off the top of my head, but I gotta imagine it's much smaller. So it's the less risky aspect. That's number one by far. Number two, which really appealed to me, is in acquiring a business, you're able to focus a little bit more on just growing the business versus when you're in that 0 to 1 phase. So much work has to happen just for you to be able to successfully sell something and collect money. It's like really, really hard. You hear those great stories of like the Instacart founder. I think he started off by creating like a very simple kind of like prototype of his product. And he literally would go to his friends and he'd be like, I will shop for your groceries. You just go in and you key this and right. That's a cool story, but you got to think that guy was like pretty accomplished tech person at that point. He must have been like, standing in Vaughn's being like, what am I doing with my life? Like, you know, it's a lot of work. So what's really great about ETA is that you acquire a business and now you can kind of get to the quote unquote fun part for some, which is you're kind of out of the lab. You know what I mean? The product or the service has already been created, and now you're focused on the things that appeal to me, which is like selling deals, growing the business, hiring great talent to hopefully be your management team, those types of things. So in that sense, it's much more appealing than starting a business from scratch. Now, people that love to create things, they'll probably be like, I hate that part. So that's why, the world needs startup founders too. And then the third reason why it's super attractive is cash flow. And I'm going to say cash flow, cash flow, cash, right? That is when you think about just the risk, even the like a small investment, right? When you read up people starting their company, my co-founder and I, Mike, we started Hireframe. I think we spent $15,000 on it, right? Which is not a small amount of money, but it's also not $100,000, right? But the really nice thing is when you are able to successfully buy a company through a search fund, the business has cash flow. So you're able to account for that. And then also, a lot of times, the bank that will give you the SBA 7 loan, they're also going to help you out with, they'll give you like a line of credit because they know they want you to succeed, right? So for all those reasons, it's super duper attractive. Now, part two of your question and how this all funnels into Hireframe is I would say that when we looked at buying companies, and this will also probably come up more later in our conversation, when you're buying a lot of these businesses, you have to ask yourself, like, what am I really buying? Unfortunately, your spidey sense has to go up on every deal. And the classic ones are when you get these sellers and they're like, I only work 4 hours a week on this thing. I do no work and I make $1 million every year. It runs itself, blah, 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 blah. There are some companies that really stand up to that, but a lot of companies, that's just total, it's just total BS, basically, right? And so a lot of, I think, what we looked at when we were actually looking at buying businesses was we just kept on asking ourselves, do we feel like we could build this ourselves in a way that accomplishes a lot of the things that a search fund does, in the sense that it's still somewhat conservative, it leverages our strengths and our talents, it can get us to quick cash flow. And we felt like the answer was yes. And that's what we're doing today with Hireframe. And I'm happy to say that the challenge that we gave ourselves with Hireframe was, we said, do we feel like we can build a business that cash flows $1 million a year and do that within the first 5 years of building that business? Now, granted, we're in year 4 and we've got a lot of work to do, but we have a clear path to that. And I feel really proud about that. But I used a lot of the things I learned in search funds to accomplish that. The way that I think, the way that we operate our business, where we invest, all of that kind of came from this like MBA that I got on the streets, if you will.
I think that is a great comparison of, the different aspects of building a business and growing a business. With the search fund, you embarked on a self-funded search fund journey, like you just talked about. What were the most significant challenges you faced during this process, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of in the name, self-funded. So first of all, I was a quota carrying salesperson that was used to making, for me, I had a long time in my life where I made very little. I was a bartender, and then I got I got into marketing, and I did a bunch of stuff. What my wife loves to talk about is when we met, she would give me rides. We met at work at Taskus. She would oftentimes give me a ride home because I didn't have a car. I was always waiting for the bus. So I was pretty broke. And so in terms of the whole self-funded search thing, that was a pretty hard. That's like one of the biggest challenges. I was used to always making, a pretty good income, and to go to zero and just be every day spending your own money on expenses, that was a huge challenge. When you look at funded, when people that get their search funded, there are specialty, basically private equity firms, different groups where they'll sponsor your search. So they'll basically say, we're going to, give you living expenses. We'll give you some of the stuff that it takes to, get deal flow. And then they're also, it's pretty cool, it's so popular now, they're going to give you a bunch of resources. So resources as in like access to attorneys is really helpful. They'll give you proprietary data sets. So they're looking at deal flow, and they have relationships with brokers and all this sort of jazz, right? So in doing the self-funded search, I came across, kind of, because we didn't have those things, there were 3 distinct challenges that, came along with doing a self-funded search. The first and foremost is the one that kills all searchers. I don't care what they say. Deal flow, deal flow, deal flow, deal flow. It's just like anything else. If you're trying to find your husband or wife, or you're trying to land a new client, or you're trying to, I don't know, you're trying to buy a house, right? The more options you have, the better decision you're going to make, and the more likely you're going to be successful, right? We've all had that friend who's like, I just can't find a boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife or whatever it is. And then you ask them what they're doing about it, and they're like, nothing. They're like, I go to work, I don't meet anybody, blah, blah, blah. You're like, well, by the laws of, numbers here, attraction, it's probably not going to happen for you. You got to have some collisions. So what we did was, to overcome that deal flow thing, basically I put on my biz dev hat, right? I used what I knew from my past life as a salesperson to my advantage. So we did a lot of self-sourcing deals, which is becoming more common with searchers. But most searchers, because they're coming from, oftentimes like business school, HBS, that type of thing, they've never done like email, prospecting or cold calling, finding that data. It's more common now, but we were really good at that because I had so much experience there. And then the other part too is we would go out and we would build relationships with people that had access to deal flow. So like attorneys, private equity firms, where they would basically send us their deals that weren't big enough for them, and then brokers too, building relationships with brokers. So that's how I overcame that. The second one is competition. Um, when you're competing for an actually like good business that does cash flow about $1 million a year, you're going to have a lot of competition from strategics. So different companies that might be like a competitor, or they want to tack on that business as like an additional offering for theirs or whatever it might be. And you're also going to encounter sometimes there's PE firms that are like, PE firms are going lower and lower. So they used to not chase these deals. I think there's so much competition now in private equity that they're coming lower and lower. So occasionally you'll come across like a specialty PE firm that's competing against you. And for that, now granted, we never successfully acquired a business, so I can't tell you it's a success story. But the way that we tried to overcome it is they talk about this term in searching, which is you want to be the son or the daughter the owner of the business, always wanted. So I really focused on that. I focused on every seller we were talking to. It's like, don't even talk about numbers. Don't come off to them as like this business person. Relate to them as a human being, get to know them, build a relationship, and really show them. A lot of them, they do care what happens to their business, and they don't want to see it ruined. So we played that up, and it got us into a lot of final rounds of deals than we should have been in, to be honest with you. And then the last part's pretty easy. It's just banks, right? So I mentioned to you that the SBA 7A loan is really good. There's a lot of banks that specialize in it. They want to do business with you. Now, with that being said, it still means that if and when it comes down to getting a deal done, you need that bank to like you. And so again, relationship building. That's how we overcame that, because they're looking at us and they're like, these are two guys, they seem smart, but they've never owned a business before. How are we going to trust them with millions of dollars? But yeah, that's some of the stuff that we encountered, and that's how we overcame it.
I love how you describe it as getting an MBA on the streets.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect description. What were some key lessons you learned about finance, negotiations, deal making that you think are crucial for anyone considering this path?
Great question. First and foremost, learn what the heck these terms are. So I am someone who I never took a finance course. I was not a business major. I truly did get my MBA on the streets. And I had a very quick, like, what is the expression? Baptism by fire. I don't know if I'm getting that right. I notoriously get expressions wrong, but this is what essentially would happen is I would look at a business, a sim for a business, basically, right? A presentation on selling that business, and I'd look at a sim and I'd say to my partner, this is a killer business. Like, we got to buy this. Like, what? And I'm falling in love with all the language. It's like, hey, this business is perfectly positioned to grow a lot. All it needs is someone to focus on sales and marketing, whatever it is. And I would fall in love with the idea of owning that business. And my partner would take two seconds to look at the financials, and he'd be like, dude, this business is losing money. Like, I don't think they even actually understand. They're months away from going out of business. I'd be like, where do you see that? So I just truly had to learn, about those different terms: gross revenue, right? Gross profit, net margin, EBITDA, cash flow. A big one that they talk a lot about and I think about this a lot in terms of Hireframe and how we grow Hireframe, is you see a lot of funny business when it comes to small businesses, when it comes to their finances, right? The classic thing is the owner employs their spouse, right? And they want, they essentially, they don't account for the fact that if you acquire that business, you're going to have to bring someone in to actually do that job, right? That they're paying their spouse for or not paying their spouse for, whatever it might be. And so very quickly, I thought as I saw a lot of these things happen, and I would see and understand why we couldn't acquire those businesses, it really helped me in thinking about how we operate Hireframe, in the sense that I think that those short-term gains, whatever that might be for you as an owner, maybe you're getting a little bit more cash in your pocket or whatever it is, it really puts you in a bad position if you ever want to sell your company, because it's not a real business. And so what we've done, at Hireframe is from the jump, we've been very focused on profitability, and we've been very mindful to always, one thing I talk to my partner about a lot is I like to pretend whenever we're in a rut and it feels like, wow, this is really stressful and how are we going to get through this? I play this mindset shift game with myself, where basically I say to him, let's pretend that we just acquired this business for $0. How would we see this balance sheet? Where would we see opportunities? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And it's about that's one of the best things that I learned in doing my search, is that I understood that I'm just going to throw like an arbitrary number on it, but I'm going to say about 90% of business owners refuse to look themselves in the mirror and understand where their blind spots really are. It's very hard. It's just like your kids. Nobody's kid is ugly, right? And it's just, I try to be sometimes, I think, too critical of our own business, but I actually think that makes us stronger. Is that you got to know, hey, just because we have cash in the bank, if we were coming in to acquire this business, we would look at that cash balance and we'd say, well, why haven't they invested in XYZ? Because they clearly need it, right? No, they were just saving cash for a rainy day. So those are some of the things that I learned. And then honestly, the last thing I'll say too is what blew my mind in doing the search is I learned about how many different ways there are to grow your business. So I always thought of growing your business in one way. It's just sell more, right? And what's incredible to me is I met a lot of searchers who had successfully acquired a business. And what was remarkable to me is that I saw the same pattern. They acquire a business, and then about a year and a half later, they usually acquire their second business. And they start to just sort of tack it on. They can do roll ups, you can tack on complementary businesses. So much of growth in business, I think, is financial, right? Using like financial strategies, finance strategies, versus just selling more, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes, that definitely makes sense. I think that's a good way to think about it, especially for founders or CEOs who everyone hits an obstacle along the way. How do you get over it? I completely agree with that. After being outbid, because you kind of teased this earlier, for
Hi.
a company,
I love that company.
you and your partner decided to start your own company. Can you elaborate on the thought process behind the pivot? And I truly believe that you learn the most from things that are not successful. So how are the lessons that you learned with this experience influencing your strategy?
Yeah, fantastic question. So I did allude to it. We had a company that I could probably, rattle off all these different crazy businesses I learned about. It's almost like someone talking about the ones that got away. You know what I mean? It's the fish that we never reeled in. But I encountered all types of crazy businesses, but I did have one that I still am to this day absolutely in love with. And I encourage anybody to look it up. It's called CR Creative Services. And they're like a niche moving and storage company for basically the 1%. So they tout I don't know, I don't want to break any NDAs here, but they tout a very, 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 very famous, call it, she has one of the biggest Instagram followings in the world, maybe the biggest, I don't know. I don't keep up with those things. But they tout her as a customer. And yeah, besides getting to meet that person, I love this business because it was a great business. It rattled off, consistently great cash flow. It was a good size. I think they had like 50 employees. It's quote unquote recession proof in the sense that it caters to this 1%. And the idea is even in a down market, somebody's making billions, right? Um, and yeah, so that one stung because we got eliminated, and we didn't even make it really to like, it wasn't even between us and one other company. We were included with 7 other groups or 6 other groups, and we didn't even make it to the next round, right? Um, yeah, and so what did I learn from that? A couple things. One is it really forced me, before I was kind of just sleepwalking into entrepreneurship. I had fallen in love with the idea of doing a search fund, and then I'd fallen in love with the idea of owning a small business. Specifically, I wanted to own something that was like blue collar. Like I wanted like a property, maintenance company, janitorial services, something. I wanted that, right? And it really forced me to look deep within myself to understand what is it that I want and what kind of drives me on a day-to-day basis. And that those conversations with myself, but also my partner, is what ultimately um, moved us forward to eventually starting Hireframe, right? Because Hireframe very much sort of encapsulates everything that's important to us. But to look back on that deal, it's a couple things that I learned. I learned about kind of when I thought about the business owner, and this is something that I think I use this in all negotiations. You got to understand what is really most important to that person. And I'll say this guy, he sat down for lunch with me and my partner, and it was like he was grinning, ear to ear. The broker said, "Oh, he loved you guys." He said literally the words, "You guys are like the sons that he never had." All those nice things, right? But at the end of the day, I know that we couldn't be as competitive with our offer. We came in really high for us, but I know that the other groups came in a lot higher. And what did this guy do? He went for the money. Because at the end of the day, no matter what, no matter how much he likes us, it's about his retirement. It's about what he can do with the remaining years of his life. And I could see it on his face. He was tired from building his business, and he wanted the most money to then go out and do whatever. He liked collecting art. He wanted to buy houses, do whatever, all cool things, right? So now, no matter what I'm doing in business, it's not a negative. I try to get down to the heart of what the person wants. If you can figure out what they want, then you can figure out if there is a deal at all to be made. And then also, how do you, get to that deal? That's a huge thing and sort of driven a lot of things I did. The other part is I learned this was really when forced to look at this, when you do buy a business through a search fund, for those SBA 7 loans, you do have to personally guarantee it. And now that was something that in those conversations with my wife, it was kind of like, what now? She's like, you said this was like risk free. She's like, and it sounds like there's definitely a risk. And just for whatever reason, I learned a big lesson at that time that it was important to me to not bet the farm. I'm not that guy. I don't think I'll ever be that guy. And I learned that, and that's really driven a lot of the things that we do at Hireframe. It's about how can we make it to the next day and continue to provide great opportunities for our team. That's kind of it, right? And then the last thing I kind of learned is one that definitely sticks with me is I loved the entire search process because I love businesses and I love learning about how businesses make money. The person that does maintenance on hot dog carts in a city, that's almost as interesting to me as the person who's trying to disrupt, taxis or whatever for Uber, right? I find both people. I could talk to the hot dog cart maintenance guy, or girl. And I'd have a bunch of questions. I'd be like, well, what kind of maintenance does a hot dog cart need? How do you find new customers? You have all of LA's hot dog carts. Have you considered expanding to San Francisco? And why not? Right. And so I love doing that. And so a big thing that I came away with was I said, whatever business I do, I want a business that allows me to do business with any business. And that's one of the things that I really thoroughly appreciate about Hireframe is it's super important to me. I know that people talk about focus, focus, focus. You really need to specialize. And I think that we're specialized in finding the best talent near shore and offshore for these mission critical positions. But the best part about it is kind of everybody needs it. And I love the fact that we can do business with anybody. So those are the big takeaways that I had from. I totally agree with you. You learn the absolute most from losses, and that was a big loss, and it stung. But I came away with this kind of framework to my life that's allowed me to move forward.
I love that perspective. And I want to go back to something that you mentioned about in your current business, taking that approach of viewing challenges through the lens of an acquisition. How has this perspective helped you identify opportunities and navigate the obstacles and kind of get out of your own way?
Yeah, awesome question. I'm trying to think of this. So unfortunately, I come back to this metaphor all too often, and I know it's an annoying metaphor because I'm a CrossFitter, and CrossFitters won't shut up about CrossFitting. So that's a thing. So here I am playing into this stereotype. But what I'll say is, if you ever done CrossFit or you are, I don't know if you do CrossFit, um, that's a no. You're part of a pool. Yeah, sorry. Can I interest you in joining the cult? No.
Does it involve reaching for coffee or wine?
Yeah. Well,
If so,
technically,
I'm in.
yeah, they talk about, it's functional fitness. So the ability to reach for that coffee or wine, that's what it is. No, I love it. No, do it or don't. But what I'll say is that I've learned a lot actually in doing CrossFit that I apply to life stuff, right? And one of the things that I think about a lot is that oftentimes, and this guy I think can be applied to anything that is basically long and strenuous or very hard, right? There's going to be times if you're doing like a 45-minute CrossFit workout, there's like a famous one people do on Memorial Day called Murph, right? So if you're doing Murph it takes forever. Most people do it in, call it like an hour or so, right? An hour of continuous exercise with a weight vest on. It's really hard. But there's this thing that happens when you're doing CrossFit workouts where you start to just break things down to the simplest of terms. And you say to yourself, okay, how many repetitions do I have left? What do I have to do? It's like if you've got 100, you start to think about, can I do 20? And then if I get to 20, can maybe I do 20 more? And then if I get to 40, can I maybe start doing them in sets of 5, right? And so that same sort of mentality is very much when I talk about viewing my own business through the lens of an acquisition, it's the exact same thing where you need to be painfully aware of the big problems. Like I said, look yourself in the mirror. Your kid is ugly in some ways, and that's okay because you gotta, not all kids are perfect, right? So our business is ugly. And I just try to take the appropriate time to say, if I was going to acquire this company, what would my own thoughts be? And I need to get out of being the parent. I have to be the third party observer for a second. So I put on that hat and I say, here's the deal. We have 100 repetitions left. How are we going to get to 100? Well, it's impossible if we say, rah, rah, we're going to get to 100 as fast as we can. No, the whole team is going to groan, right? So then I say, what is the equivalent of doing that next 20? What's the equivalent of doing the next 20 reps, right? And so how do I take these big problems and distill them down to small steps that I can take, right? So that's on the kind of like fixing some of our challenges. The other way that I think about it in terms of acquisition is I get out of my own head about how to grow the business. And I say, what if I was some fresh thinking whatever search funder that came in and acquired this thing, what sort of outside the box thoughts would I have about how to grow this business? Because when you're in it on a day-to-day basis, you tend to get stuck thinking, I can only grow it in one way. And so that is another part, a key part of the lens that I use. And then finally, I try to just take the medicine, which is if the finances aren't great, you got to be honest with that. And you have to work with a sense of urgency. So it's like that's that part that I learned from doing the search when I would meet in a Denny's with someone who had like a home restoration business, and the poor guy or girl, my partner and I would walk out of the meeting and we'd be like, that business is going to be out of business in the next 6 months. And he or she has no idea, right? So I try to apply that same level of scrutiny, which is even if you have cash in the bank, even if you don't have debt, right? You still have to be honest with what your situation is and understand if you are, in fact, at risk for going out of business. And then you just say, well, how do we cure? How do we make this a little bit more sustainable? We need more customers. We need to lower our operating expenses. Maybe we don't need that new cool, software. You just got to take it down to the basics. And I think that type of like ruthless scrutiny of your own business, if more business owners were that way consistently, you'd see a lot more successful exits. But unfortunately, life happens. You take your eye off the prize, and then you end up in a weird situation where you're like, I don't know how I got here, but I've got a business I can't even sell, and I need to sell it.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. CrossFit aside, great
Yeah.
advice.
There's going to be some small segment, because this will be our friends listening. There'll be a very small segment of this listenership that'll be like, yeah. And then a very small, and then a larger segment that will be like, God, CrossFit, here we go again.
Well,
Blah, blah, blah.
as we wrap up, what additional advice do you have for founders thinking of an exit or starting this journey that can be kind of crazy?
So I would say first and foremost, talk to you, because I understand. I understand that you're kind of putting together like almost like a little, boot camp, right, for thinking about these things.
I
Yeah.
am hopefully launching it shortly.
Okay. I'm breaking news here for
You're
people,
breaking news, but that's
but
fine. You can do
but
solo work.
talk to you no matter what. But no, I'd say that you represent, right, an actual third party. So if I had any advice to give, it would be put yourself, my partner and I do this basically once a year, right? And I think most co-founders do this. Once a year, we spend some time, just the two of us, just like any good, healthy relationship, right? Quality time. We spend just time, the two of us, and we have honest conversations about our business. This is at least once a year. I hope to do it more often. It should probably be like once a quarter. But I've got a 2-year-old, another one on the way. But with that said, we spend time. You have to go somewhere physically, right? So I don't care if it's like the local, Holiday Inn or whatever it is. You got to get away from your office, because when you're in your office near your computer, you're just going to fall into the normal routine, right? You can't do it at home, because home's going to interrupt you too. So you have to get away, and you got to turn the phones off. You got to do some adequate prep work, right, before that conversation. But what we try to do is we try to basically run that simulation every single year, where we say to ourselves, if we were going to sell this business this year, what things would be absolutely critical to get done? You make a list of those things, and then you say, how can we accomplish those things in the next 3 to 6 months? And you work with a crazy sense of urgency. Now, I'm not saying we're selling Hireframe anytime soon, unless someone's out there. Elon, I don't know if you're bored. You seem bored, right? Elon, I don't know how we could help. Teslas, I'm sure, need staff or something, right? Yeah. And then Rhonda will get you on the payroll too, to be hype person. But yeah, we're not selling it anytime soon. But what I know for a fact is that if we do this consistently every single year, we can only get better for it. And when that time comes, we'll be very thankful that we did that. And I think that for most founders, you spend so much time in the day-to-day fires of your business and just getting caught up with like kind of the routine that you forget to do this stuff. And then when that day comes and you're sitting in a conference room and you're talking to a prospective buyer of your company, you'll say, man, I wish I did X, Y, and Z. Oh, what was I doing? Right. And so I try to avoid that by doing this today. Pretend, make believe that drives real decisions and real results.
Yeah. I think that's great. And when Elon texts me,
Yeah. I figured you guys,
intro,
yeah, I
you know,
figure you're on a text basis with Elon. Yeah.
totally. I
Yeah.
mean,
Like, dude, what's up?
he might have lost my number, but I'm sure it's in there somewhere.
Yeah. You can always find him on Twitter or whatever they're calling it now. X. Yeah.
Well, Tyler, this was a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Exit Journey podcast.
Thank you. I had a blast. Good luck to you. Do Rhonda's boot camp whenever it comes out, and like and subscribe. This is a great podcast.
Thanks for the promotion.
Mm-hmm.
And for all of you listening, including Elon, if you or someone you know would like to be on the podcast to talk about the journey your company took during their path towards a successful exit, please contact us. The info is in the description, or you can visit straighttalk.marketing. Until next time, we wish you successful navigation of the potholes and pitfalls in your exit journey.